Hummingbirds, just get right into it here. They are classified in the order Apodiformes. They're in the family Trochilidae. There are two families within the Apodiformes, the Trochilidae, or the hummingbirds, and the swifts. Apodiformes means what? Any Latin scholars here? Means birds that have no feet. And in fact, I got a phone call one time from somebody who had a bet with a guy in his office. He says, swifts have no feet. And he wanted me to solve that problem for him, and he lost that bet because they actually do have feet, but they're fairly small. Swifts are found throughout the world. Trochilidae, the hummingbirds, are found only in the Americas, North, Middle, and South America. Claims of a fossil hummingbird from France needs verification. There's 331 species worldwide. That varies depending on what people believe is a species. 23 are found in North America, so most of them are found in the tropics. And you'll get much higher diversity as you get down into the tropics. Of those, 14 have been recorded in California. A number of those have been recorded only a few times and are what we call vagrants, birds which are outside of their normal range. 7 of them, however, breed regularly. Now, what did I do with this? Okay. Now, the one that is probably most familiar to you and the one that I saw outside the building here on my way is the Andean Hummingbird. We have 2 breeding species in the Bay Area, and the one that you probably best know, if you've ever seen a hummingbird around here, it's either this one or the next one. And this photo was taken on one of my field trips for the ornithology class that I teach. And it's a male with a dark, there you go. It looked black in that previous photo, but in this photo, the head is turned, and suddenly that black feathering on the throat and on the head turns a bright magenta color. And this is one of the things that hummingbirds are most famous for, and that is iridescent coloration. Now, iridescent coloration is a type of structural color. It is not produced entirely by pigments, but by a combination of pigments and feather structure. In general, the best way to explain it is that color is a frequency of a light wave, and you can get a phony frequency of a light wave due to interference patterns between 2 other light waves. That is produced by a cutaneous substance on the feather barbules on the throat. The feathers are composed of a central shaft, barbs on the side, and little barbules that hook the feathers together. And so, make a long story short, if the light hits it right, you'll get bright colors. And those colors can shift and change back and forth. But the actual pigments on those feathers, black. So it's just pure melanin with an overlay of feather structure on it that produces all of this bright color. Now, why do these birds have this bright color? Well, let's talk about that. Here is the other species of hummingbird that you might see, and these birds just arrived this month. And this one is called Allen's hummingbird. And it's a little bit smaller than the Andean hummingbird. And again, this is a male here showing a dark gorget. These are the iridescent feathers on the throat. And the bird has much more orangey color on the sides and on the face. This one is in the genus Selasphorus, and we'll get back to that in a minute. When it turns its head, you can get red, green, yellows. Quite a number of different colors may show up on this bird. There's another similar bird which migrates through here called the Rufous Hummingbird. This is the race of Allens that's found along the immediate coast. Notice the really sharply pointed central tail feathers that help distinguish it from other species. This is another one photographed over at Lake Merced on one of the field trips. It's a bit of a project to get these birds to shine their throat feathers at you. So you just take a lot of pictures and hope the bird moves into position. So they are capable of perching. They do have feet, but they cannot walk. Okay, so if they want to get from one place to another, they have to fly there. And one of the things that they can do that no other bird is capable of doing is to fly backwards under powered flight. And they do that by rotating their wings basically upside down. They have a ball and socket joint, which allows them to do that so they can get power on both the upstroke and the backstroke like this. It's actually a whole lot more complicated than that, but it requires tensor calculus to understand it. Now, when people talk about hummingbirds, they always say, well, I saw the ruby-throated hummingbird. Well, no, you didn't. The hummingbird you saw was some other species than the ruby-throated hummingbird. The ruby-throated hummingbird is the one that everybody talks about because it is the hummingbird of the eastern United States. So we're here with 7 breeding species of hummingbird in California, and the entire eastern half of North America is stuck with only 1 species of hummingbird. So if you like hummingbirds, come to California or go to Arizona or something like that, and you get much more diversity. Now, why, you might ask, is there only 1 in the eastern United States and we have so many? Well, one of the factors is the varied geostructure. That is, the eastern United States is fairly flat and pretty uniform. The western United States has mountain ranges, it has deep valleys, and those are the kinds of things that might generate more species than you would find in a more uniform type of environment. But there are probably other things involved here too. Now, this is a very poor photograph of a ruby-throated hummingbird that I took in the Nevada County, Nevada City, in August of 2008. And it was the first ruby-throated hummingbird that I had ever seen in California. The bird was found by somebody who lived up there and recognized the bird, and so I went up and took a picture of it. And then what I try to do is to document rarities, not just with photos, but with detailed plumage descriptions, and I post these on the website and then submit them to the California Bird Records Committee so that they can have some documentation for claims of things like ruby-throated hummingbird. Because if, like I say, if you told me you saw a ruby-throated hummingbird, you're going to need extraordinary evidence because that is an extraordinary claim. Now, here's one that maybe doesn't look all that interesting, but I find it quite fascinating. This is another ruby-throated hummingbird in California, and it was found by my friend Keith Hansen at his feeders up in Bolinas. And so it had been there a couple of days, and we went to, I called him up, he says it's still there this morning. And I got there, and here is this hummingbird. Now, female hummingbirds are extraordinarily difficult to tell apart. Many of them are almost indistinguishable, and the female ruby-throated hummingbird is indeed almost indistinguishable from some other species. And I was taking these photographs of the bird. Notice how white it is on the underparts, much whiter than, say, the female Anna's hummingbird. And it would come by about every 15 minutes. And then I went through my photos and I got real excited because you can see right here this feather, which is known as P10. These birds have primaries that are numbered from the inside out, and so they have 10 primaries. Those are the outer wing feathers. And that feather can be seen to be narrow. And then the next feather is sort of a little bit broader, and then the next one is a little bit broader. So the species which is almost identical to the ruby-throated hummingbird is called the black-chinned hummingbird. And it's fairly common in the Central Valley. It doesn't get over to the coast here very much, but the females are very hard to tell apart from the female ruby-throated hummingbird. So this is the narrow P10, which identifies this exactly and unequivocally as the female ruby-throated hummingbird. And I can see that you're just as excited about that as I am. The thrill in this audience to see that narrow P10, yes?
When did you see this particular bird? How long ago?
That would have been in September a couple years ago. But I got real thrilled with it, and when I documented it, and by the way, most of these you can find on my website, most of this stuff, and more detailed, a whole full detailed description of it. But there's P10, P9, and P8, just to make sure you know what you're talking about. Now, this comes from Arizona. We just, Western Field Ornithologists just had our annual conference there last year in September. And this is the female of the black-chinned hummingbird, which is one of the most common hummingbirds in southeastern Arizona. And there's some details in the wing that I can't quite see because of the light, but the paddle-shaped feather tip is much, much broader than on that ruby-throated hummingbird. And this is the male black-chinned hummingbird. This is in the genus Archilochus. It's in the same genus as the ruby-throated, so they form a species pair. And the main difference is that on the male, the throat color is different. So the ones we get out here, and we don't usually get this one out here, by the way. The range maps indicate they get all the way to the coast. They don't really. There's some nesting in the San Jose area, but I've never seen it in San Francisco. This is the smallest hummingbird in North America. It's called the Calliope Hummingbird. It's barely 3 inches long, and although there's a couple of species in the tropics that are marginally smaller than the Calliope Hummingbird, they are permanent residents. This is a migratory bird, and it migrates down to southwestern Mexico. So it is testing the limits of a warm-blooded vertebrate's metabolism. Being so small, it is extremely difficult to maintain warm-bloodedness, endothermy, because of the surface area per unit volume. And so there's a limit to how small you can be and still be warm-blooded, which all birds are. And, but the energetics of migration also take a whole lot out of this bird. So as I say, this one is a real test case. Now this is another breeding bird in California. It's quite a rare migrant in the coast. I've never seen it in the city. There's some reports from Mount Davidson. But it breeds in the Sierra Nevada and is in fact the only breeding hummingbird in the Sierra Nevada. This is from Arizona. This is called the broad-billed hummingbird. And this occurs as a vagrant. I photographed it up in Napa County. But this is a male broad-billed hummingbird, and it shows how broad the base of the bill is and bright red. Very interesting, iridescent blue and green on the entire underparts. And this is, remember that Allen's hummingbird in the genus Selasphorus? This is another Selasphorus, only it's pretending to be a ruby-throated hummingbird, looking sort of like that. But it doesn't have the black chin. Instead, it's got white up in the chin. And if you look carefully, it's got rust in the tail. And this is a bird which breeds in the Rocky Mountains and through the Great Basin and marginally into California in places like the White Mountains, where it can be detected by its metallic trill. It sounds like a cicada. This is called the broad-tailed hummingbird. And if you look carefully at this photo, you can see the tips of those primaries are pointed and twisted. And that metallic trill is made mechanically by the wing whir of the broad-tailed hummingbird. Females are hard to tell from female Allen's hummingbirds, for example. This is one of the largest hummingbirds in North America. It's called the magnificent hummingbird. And this is a male here. I was never able to get all of the colors on the throat here, which is a lot of green usually. The underparts are black. This one is showing a fair amount of blue and some purple trim on the top of the head. Notice how long the bill is. I have actually seen this bird in California, where there are 2 records, but this is a bird that I photographed in Arizona. It is a lump situation. It used to be called Rivoli's hummingbird, and it was separate from the magnificent hummingbird, which is found in Costa Rica and adjacent Panama. But they decided they were both the same species, so they're both called magnificent now. This is a rarity. This is an uncommon visitor to southeastern Arizona. It breeds very locally and along sycamores, along watercourses, and it's called the violet-crowned hummingbird, and the males and females are quite similar. It's not safe to tell them apart in the field, or so the books say, but I'm calling this one a female anyway, throwing caution to the wind, because it doesn't have a very striking violet color on the crown. It's a bit duller. It is an adult because the upper mandible, the maxilla, is bright red along with the rest of the bill. This is an extreme rarity anywhere in the United States. It's called the plain-capped starthroat. And we visited Ash Canyon, where there's a guest lodge there, and the lady had this plain-capped starthroat coming periodically to her feeder. And that was back in, I think, 2003 that we visited there in the summertime. And this was a bird that I was particularly keen on seeing because in 1971, I had been on a car trip with my friend Ron LaValle down in Mexico. And as we were driving into San Blas, I'm sitting in the back seat and Ron goes, "Plain cap starthroat," and keeps on driving based on a bird that he saw perched in a snag on the side of the road. And I figured, sure, we're going to see plain cap starthroats all over the place when we get to San Blas. Otherwise, we would have stopped. Well, it didn't work out that way. It took me more than 30 years before I saw a plain cap starthroat, and this is that plain cap starthroat. Again, males and females tend to look similar on this one. Now, we did a trip in 2007 down to Trinidad as these photos come from the Asa Wright Nature Reserve. And here's a little map, and it shows where the mountains are. And again, you find the best diversity in the mountains, and that's about where we were. This is an island, in case everybody knows where this is, but it's off Venezuela. There's another associated island on Tobago, and it's interesting the differences in the birds between the two islands. Lots of big differences. And there I photographed this white-necked Jacobin, one of the more spectacular hummingbirds that we have. Very striking blue head and green back, and this white patch on the back of the neck. What is really curious to me about the white-necked Jacobin on Trinidad is that we only saw males. We never saw any females. And in fact, nesting has never been documented on Trinidad for this species, which raises the question, what are they doing there? On Tobago, we saw a few females, but that's a different race from the one that is on Trinidad, which is related to the mainland birds. So, you know, what's going on here? I don't think anybody really understands what's going on here, but I've got some clues that'll come up a little bit later. This is the white-chested emerald, which is one of the other more common hummingbirds that we saw there. And the males and females on this are alike without any color on the throat. And this is called the Copper-rumped Hummingbird, and it's a little smaller than the others, and it is the most aggressive and the biggest bully in the flock there. And it would chase away the Jacobins and the white-chested emeralds and the ruby topaz hummingbird and the little, there's another hummingbird there that it kept chasing off that I wanted to see. If you really like hummingbirds, go to Ecuador because it's got more hummingbirds per mile than any other place in the world. And it's got high mountains and deep valleys, and it has a very heterogeneous geography. And that's the kind of thing that allows speciation to take place. The more you see mountaintops, you'll see that kind of possibility of unique species evolving, because geographic heterogeneity allows for geographic isolation, which is the key feature of allopatric speciation. That is, you have a geographic isolated population out here that is separated from its parental population. If it doesn't get back, it has an opportunity to change over time, and that's how you get new species. Okay, so we went to a couple different places. I apologize for this photo, but I couldn't resist. This is at Yanacocha. This is the sword-billed hummingbird, and it has the longest bill related to the bird of anything. And it's a dark colored bird, and this is the way the photo came out. But you can at least see that this thing is insane.
How long is the
I wish I'd have to look that up. Here we're back up at Tandiapa Lodge, and you know, it's really hard to tell the sizes of these hummingbirds because this looks like the biggest hummingbird you ever saw, and it isn't. So we're not doing these according to their actual size. Most of these are pretty small. Quite a few different species. I'll just try to go through fairly quickly. This used to be called the white-tipped. White-tip is what it was called. Now it's called the purple-throated white-tip. And it has this little white tip here because it was split from some other thing called a rufous-vented white tip, but they're very hard to tell apart. And the only way I really know this is from where it was photographed. And I'm pretty sure this one here is a purple-throated wood star. Anybody know for sure? I could tell you anything and you'd believe. No, okay. This is called the Western Emerald, and this is another split. The males and females on these are alike, very short bill, very dark bird, but in good light you see a mixture of green and iridescent blue. This is a very flamboyant hummingbird with a tiny short little bill called the buff-tailed coronet. And it has a buffy stripe on the underwings, which shows as the birds are flying around. And also when they land with their wings up like this, so you can see the buff stripe on the underwing. This is a photo of the same thing from the back. You can see the little buff patch there at the corners of the underwing. And this one is called the fawn-breasted brilliant. And this one has a little, this is a male here with a little purple patch. The females have less. And this is called the Andean Emerald. And both the males and females here look very much alike, all white underneath, and just a little bit more blue on the crown on the males. This shows details of the tail pattern for the subspecies that occurs there. There's another photo. I thought this one was probably a female because it lacked the blue on the crown. Again, the Andean Emerald. This is called the sparkling Violetear, and it's a fairly large hummingbird, and it was one of the most common hummingbirds that we saw at Tandayapa. The AOU, the American Ornithologists Union, has a committee that settles on English names for birds, and they spent probably more time than they needed to change the spelling of Violetear in order to remove the hyphen. There's long paragraphs online that explain why it is that they removed the hyphen from the spelling of Violetear. I wish I had that much time on my hands. Here is another sparkling Violetear. And as I say, the males and females look alike, and these were one of the really common birds that we saw up there. This is the Rufous-tailed Hummingbird, a female, one of the most aggressive of all of the hummingbirds. This is the one that likes to bully and chase away the other hummingbirds. I don't know why they can't just learn to get along, but they don't. This is called the green-crowned brilliant, and you can identify it by the long forked tail. It's fairly locally distributed in northwestern South America. And this is probably one of the rarest hummingbirds that I'm going to show you. It's called the Empress Brilliant, and it's a very scarce bird and very localized in the Choco region of South America. It's similar to that green-crowned brilliant. You can see more contrast on the chest, and especially the very long, deeply notched tail. This is called the booted Racket-tail. And by the way, Racket-tail is hyphenated. I don't know why the AOU didn't get rid of that hyphen. But it's called booted because of these really fluffy feathers that are around the bases of the legs. The tarsus of the legs are completely covered over by white puffs that look like cotton. And then this is the male here with these really long streamer tails and rackets at the very tip. Now, what do they use these for? Well, I can tell you. They display to females, and they display in an upright pose and then move the tail back and forth like this, like scissors going back and forth. So it's a display in order to attract females. There's quite a few other species that have even more elaborate tail feathers than this. Probably the most famous is the rare and threatened marvelous spatule tail, which I have never seen. This is down at Milpay. This is in the lowlands. Well, not, it's in foothill region, more below Tandayapa. This is the female green thorntail. And this is the male, and I was never able to get a picture that showed the iridescent color of the head. I tried flash, and it just didn't look right. I prefer natural light if I can do it. This is one of the more common hummingbirds at Milpay, and it's called the green-crowned wood nymph. And keep that in mind, because that used to be lumped with a bunch of other species, and we'll talk about it later. This one shows the green, well, the whole head is green, I don't know, green-crowned wood nymph. And this is another picture of that one that I showed you with that purple bib white tip. This is in flight, and you can see the cocktail. This is the female or immature male of the purple-throated wood star. These birds all have really evocative names, you know, brilliants, emeralds, coronets. It's kind of hard to keep them all in place. This is the trip that we made to Costa Rica in January of 2009. We went to a couple places. One is a Rancho Naturalista, which is in the foothills over here, and at higher elevations we went to a place called Savegre Mountain Lodge, and I'll show you pictures from both. This is from Rancho Naturalista, and you know this one already, right?
Hungover Hummingbird.
What is it?
Hungover Hummingbird.
No.
White-necked Jacobin.
White-necked Jacobin, yes. And that is the male. And then here is this bird, which got a lot of people confused, and this is the female of the white-necked Jacobin. And it varies a lot. And this is one type of plumage of the female white-necked Jacobin. It's spotted here on the entire underparts, almost kind of polka-dotted. Now here's another bird, and the naturalists there at the lodge were identifying these as immature male white-necked Jacobins, which they are not. They are adult female white-necked Jacobins. And this is a more male-like plumage. And it turns out that a percentage of female white-necked Jacobins are indistinguishable from male white-necked Jacobins. They look just about like the males do. So you can see here a change from a duller looking bird to a brighter looking bird to a very bright looking bird. And this is within the females. Now, what does this mean, and why is this happening? Well, one of the things you might want to ask is, one of the things about hummingbirds is, why the bright colors? Now, Darwin talked about two kinds of selection. He talked about natural selection, and he talked something about something else. When you couldn't explain something by natural selection, like the peacock with the outrageous looking plumes, he called it sexual selection. And that is basically get yourself noticed if you want to be able to mate and try to impress females. So there's this system of male-male competition and female choice, and the males gain an advantage by looking outrageous. But what is the advantage to the female to looking outrageous? Or is there an advantage? Or why do females tend to look drab? And what are the factors that might cause that to happen? Well, what I'm going to propose here is that the ancestral state may actually be bright, because the females in many places look just as bright as the males, and that the dull female plumage is actually derived in response to environmental pressures. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. Here's another one where the males and females look alike. This is actually a fairly scarce bird called the brown violetear, and you spell violetear without the hyphen. Here is the green-breasted mango. As long as they're messing around with names, they should change this one, because the breast isn't green. Mangoes are a group of hummingbirds with kind of curved bills. Many of these species of hummingbirds forage on flowers that depend on them for pollination. This is the female green-breasted mango, and this species has wandered as far north as Texas. There are records of this bird in the United States. This is a very localized little bird. It's all purple with a white forehead, and it's called the snowcap. And it is a specialty of Rancho Naturalista. Photographers come from all over the world to try to photograph the snowcap. I was never able to get it in the light that I wanted it in. It's a tiny little guy, by the way. This was one of the most common hummingbirds there, and it's called the violet-crowned wood nymph. Now, do you remember the green-crowned wood nymph from Ecuador? Yeah, right. I'm sure you do. That bird was the same species as this, but there was a split. Actually, there's a three-way split in which you have these separate populations that were regarded as separate subspecies. Now they are regarded as separate species. Since they don't overlap each other, there's no way to test whether or not they're reproductively compatible. But there are other reasons why it is that they've decided to split these birds. Anyway, very common bird, but I had the hardest time trying to get a photo. They would never sit still. This is a terrible photo, but it's the green hermit, and I wanted to talk about hermits briefly. They have extremely long bills. Some species of hermits pollinate heliconia, you know, those long tubular flowers. The banana is in that family, I think. And some of these hermits, the flower depends on that particular species of hermit to be able to pollinate it. And the hermit depends on that particular species of flower to get the nectar. So it's called coevolution. When the two things are completely dependent on each other, they have evolved in parallel with each other, using each other as a resource. The other thing that's cool about these guys is that hermits are the only hummingbirds that are known to form leks, L-E-K. A bunch of males get together and do a dance, basically, display to each other, and then females come in and try to mate. But there is never any pair bond in any of these hummingbirds, and I'll talk about that when I get there. Sometimes people wonder how the photos were taken. These are all taken using a point-and-shoot camera through my spotting scope that I use in the field. And here I am. This is actually at a research station, agricultural research station near Rancho Naturalista. We're now back up in the highlands, and this is at Savegre, and this is the magnificent hummingbird again. But this is the real magnificent hummingbird. This is the larger one, not the Rivoli's hummingbird that I photographed in Arizona that's now lumped in with the magnificent. Here's the female, which looks for all the world like a female Anna's hummingbird, except for the overwhelmingly large size and the extremely long bill. This is the most common hummingbird at Savegre. It is called the green violet-ear. And it's very similar to the sparkling violet-ear. It's a little bit smaller. The tail is shorter. You can see the violet ear patch. This, I think, is a male. It shows a little bit of blue right here on the, but the females are quite similar. There's actually a record, an accepted record of a green violet-ear from Berkeley, California. Lady had one come to her feeder, described it, was accepted by the committee. We used to, when you're there, you just hear constantly chirp, 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 chirp. It's these guys sitting in the tops of the trees, just chirping away, nonstop. This one shows the ear tufts are actually extensile, so they sort of stick out when they're displaying. This is called the white-throated mountain gem, and this is the male. And it used to be, there's some confusion between it and the purple-throated mountain gem. The males look totally different. This is the male, and this is the female, and the females are almost identical in those two species. This one shows the gray central tail feathers, which identify this as the white-throated mountain gem. There are two species of Selasphorus hummingbirds, hummingbirds in the genus Selasphorus, that coexist in Savegre, and one is the Volcano Hummingbird and the other is the Scintillant Hummingbird. They look a lot like our Allen's and Rufous hummingbirds, which are also Selasphorus hummingbirds. And it's interesting that you have the two species coexisting there. This is the Volcano Hummingbird, and it is the only photograph that I was able to obtain that shows the bird's head. All of the other photos look like this. It's a tiny little hummingbird, and it would just bury its head in the feeder. And you can see the long tail here and a little bit of white on the tip of the tail. And this is the other Selasphorus that occurs there, and it's called the Scintillant Hummingbird. The females are very similar to female Volcano hummingbirds. And this is a nest which was constructed right on the doorway of the Quetzal Research Center, and on a hook, a support hook, that was right where people were walking back and forth the whole time. So all of the hummingbirds build similar nests. They are dainty cup-shaped nests built out of plant fibers, very well woven, and often they have bits of lichen or other material on the outside, not so much for decoration, but to conceal, I believe, the nest. And this one shows that there is a chick in the nest. I was doing a little research on this, and the clutch size on this species is actually not known to science. But this bird had only one chick in it, but most hummingbirds lay 2 eggs. And I'd be surprised if the scintillant was anything other than that. So a little bit fuzzy, but at least it does show the chick. In all of these cases, the female builds the nest entirely without the help from the male, incubates the eggs without any help from the male, and feeds the babies without any male parental investment. There's no pair bond. Now, this last month, we went to Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico has 5 species of hummingbirds, which is the most of any Caribbean island. Now, islands are another way that you get species. You're familiar with Darwin's finches and possibly the founder principle. Islands provide an opportunity for geographic isolation, which is perhaps a little bit easier to understand than the geographic isolation on mountaintops, but it's pretty much the same phenomenon. But what happens in island situations is that the background rates of extinction are way, way higher than they are in continental areas and in big mountain ranges. Extinction rates are much, much lower in large areas because big climate change differences, you can adjust. You can move up the mountain or down the mountain or move to a different place, or something's going to change gradually and you have an opportunity to get out of there. When things go wrong on an island, you're stuck on that island. And so extinction rates on islands are really common. This species is called the Antillean Mango, and it is found on 2 islands, Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, different races on each island, and it is found nowhere else in the world. Now, this bird is sexually dimorphic. This is the female, and the males are brightly colored on the underparts. And this bird is disappearing from Puerto Rico. It's being pushed from the east side of Puerto Rico, where it used to be common, all the way to the west side of Puerto Rico, where it is now, it has, its population is still well established. What's been happening is an Antillean bird, a bird from the Lesser Antilles called the green-throated carib, has moved in. It's about the same size, same shape, has the same bill shape, has moved into western Puerto Rico and appears to be displacing this bird. Now, why would this green-throated carib be displacing this bird? It has to do with this guy, and that is the presence of bird-eating resident hawks, resident bird-eating hawks, like this sharp-shinned hawk, which is found on the islands of Puerto Rico. It's found also, well, it's found throughout North America and South America, but this subspecies is found only on Puerto Rico. And in fact, this subspecies is critically endangered. The latest estimates are there's no more than 150 birds left of the sharp-shinned hawks in Puerto Rico. So what's going on here is that the, and this is a little bit speculative, but I think that the Antillean Mango is from Hispaniola and Puerto Rico, where this hawk occurred. And it evolved sexual dimorphism in response to that, so that the females would be drab-looking, so they would have higher nesting success because they would be less likely to be eaten by sharp-shinned hawks. As the sharp-shinned hawk declined due to deforestation and other factors, it is no longer a factor. And that means that green-throated carib, where the males and females look alike, can move into Puerto Rico. It may compete with this bird, and it does not need to be sexually dimorphic because this bird is no longer a significant issue. And again, this bird is mostly left in the western part of Puerto Rico. And this is, in fact, the rarest bird I'm going to show you tonight, or today, this afternoon. Not a great photo, but I wanted to show you how long the tongue can be on these birds. They have an extremely long extensile tongue. It is not a straw. Sometimes people think they just slurp up nectar like it's a straw. They have a little bifid tip, and they extract nectar through basically capillary action, but they just sort of pick it up from the tip of the tongue and draw it back into their mouths. They also feed on little insects that they find in the flowers also. Going to wind it up here. This is Belize in February of last year. And Belize is in, well, it's sort of squeezed between Mexico and Guatemala in Central America. It used to be called British Honduras. And this nest was right outside our lodge, our cabin. And it is the female Rufous-tailed Hummingbird, a different race from the one that we saw down in Ecuador, but it's the same species, the Rufous-tailed Hummingbird. And again, the nest was built right on a path where people are walking back and forth. I'm very sensitive about trying to photograph nesting birds. You don't want to intrude upon the birds and cause nesting failure. But digiscoping, what I was, I have to back really far away to get the bird in focus. So, and I didn't think that there was any impact there in photographing these particular nests. Here is the Rufous-tailed Hummingbird, showing why it's called Rufous-tailed. It has a very nice rufous tail. There was a rainstorm and a little shower, and after the rain stopped, this bird perched on a leaf right off of our front porch. And this is the one that I chose for the little brochure. It shows very broad base to the bill. This is an adult male Rufous-tailed Hummingbird. This is, again, one of the most aggressive hummingbirds of all of the ones that we're talking about here. It chases away everything else. And my speculative idea about why there are so few species of hummingbirds in Belize is that the Rufous-tails have chased them all away. If you look carefully, you can see me reflected in a hummingbird's eye.
Oh, wow.
Thank you. I have classes that start in April, and if any of you are interested, they are through continuing education, which means they're way more expensive than the classes here, but they are worth it. So anyway, that's my website if you want information on any of the classes that I teach. Yes?
Have you ever photographed a bee hummingbird?
The bee hummingbird is confined to Cuba, and I have never been to Cuba. Some of my friends have, and it is said to be the smallest hummingbird in the world. And have you seen it?
No.
Yeah, it is. It holds the record. Yes?
I have a hummingbird nesting in my backyard on my patio.
Yes.
Is that unusual, or is that something caused by global warming?
No. The hummingbirds that are nesting right now are almost all Anna's hummingbirds, and they start nesting normally in January. And along the immediate coast, they nest earlier than they do in the interior. So part of the reason for that, I have a theory about that, is that the Allen's hummingbirds come in March and April and usurp all of the Anna's hummingbird territories. See, these birds are highly territorial. The Anna's is the one that gets up there and sings. Bzz, 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 bzz. And then did you ever see him go pop at the bottom of the dive? And that's been a controversy for a heck of a long time. How do they make that sound? Well, there was this ornithologist at Chico. He says, I took the outer tail feathers from a bird and I put it at the end of a whip. And I went, and it popped. And so other people tried to do that, and they couldn't reproduce his results. And then Luis Batista at the Academy of Sciences was doing research on hummingbird vocalizations, and he was making sonograms. And he says, you know what? That popping sound is identical to a vocal sound that is made by the bird vocally. And it's just louder. And so he wrote a paper saying that it was vocal. And then some people at Berkeley did what I have been suggesting to my students for a long time, and that is, why don't you just take the darn hummingbird and pull the outer tail feathers and watch it display and see if it can make a popping sound? And it can't. So it is made by the tail feathers the whole time. That's what's going on there. Yes?
I usually just see a hummingbird individually, not in a flock.
Yeah, they hate each other. The times where you see lots of hummingbirds coming together is often just before it gets dark, because many of them actually don't maintain their body temperature at night. Many of them will go torpid, especially in cold weather. Anna's hummingbirds definitely go torpid. So they might be willing to tolerate each other at certain locations, but in general they're highly territorial. And even the females have a hard time sometimes. We know very little about copulation in hummingbirds because it's very seldom observed. The females have to basically seduce the male by entering his territory. He chases her out of the territory, and then she sort of sits there and he finally figures out what he's supposed to do. That's down on the periphery of the territory. Yes? There's lots of hummingbirds in Golden Gate Park. They're almost all Annas and Allens. And a good place to look for them would be North Lake. And later on, in like April or so, go to North Lake in Golden Gate Park. At the south end, there's a little trickle that comes down into the lake from somewhere. And these are all artificial lakes, but they bathe in that trickle. And you can look down on them and you can see them really well. Yes?
Now, out of the two we have here, I've heard that one does a J pattern and one does a U pattern. Have you ever heard anything about the diving?
Well, yes, the Anna's hummingbird does a J. It gets way up high and it goes pow at the bottom.
Right.
The Allen's hummingbird does not exactly, it does a J also, but it does not make a pop at the bottom. Instead, it makes a whine. Whee! At the bottom of the dive. So its tail feathers are shaped differently.
And then one other thing is that you didn't mention Costa's hummingbird.
It's a desert species that is found in the desert Southwest. In the Bay Area, it reaches a place, Stanislaus County.
Okay.
At Del Pardo Canyon Road is a place where they're sometimes seen. They may be rare elsewhere in California. I know a guy in Marin who had one at his feeder one winter, so it's a rarity further north, outside of the desert areas. Okay? Yes?
Are there classes here at City College?
In this?
Yeah.
I don't know. Are there any classes here in ornithology at City College? Not yet. They're going to kick us out of the Marina Middle School where I've been teaching. So I wouldn't mind having a night class here if the department head approves it, because they're trying to save money and we pay rent to Unified School District for the site, and I don't think it's going to happen next year. Yes?
What do you recommend as a formula for hummingbird feeders?
I recommend 4 or 5 parts water to 1 part sugar by volume. Use refined white sugar. Do not use brown sugar. Do not use honey. You don't have to use a dye. A lot of people will put a red dye in there. A lot of people think, well, that red dye causes tumors, it causes pancreatic cancer, it causes this, that, and the other thing. None of that has ever been proven. And I actually did some research on this because there's a website on hummingbirds that talks a lot about that and has a lot of scare tactics about hummingbird mixtures, and particularly the evils of various kinds of dyes. But there's a company called Perky Pet, and they advertise their, special hummingbird mixture, and it has a red dye in it, and they advertise that it is approved by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So I went and I wrote to Perky Pet, and I says, could you tell me what that red dye is? And they said, that's a trade secret. They did. But I did find out that the Department of Agriculture does not approve vegetable dyes. They are assumed to be safe. They only approve petroleum-based dyes. So that means that if it's approved by the not FDA, Department of Agriculture is what I think it is. If it's approved by them, it is a petroleum-based dye that is probably safe for cows or something. Yeah, right. But I doubt that it's ever been tested on hummingbirds.
And do you recommend boiling it first to dissolve the sugar all the way?
You can, you don't have to. Hot water will dissolve it also. That mixture will dissolve on its own. And the main thing to do is to clean the feeder periodically. Don't wait for the hummingbirds to finish all of it when you've got mold growing in it, because the mold is quite dangerous to it. Anybody can get a hummingbird feeder and have hummingbirds anywhere in the city. Even in downtown, they'll find your hummingbird feeders.
And is it okay to do it year-round here?
Absolutely. The Anna's hummingbird is here year-round. The Allen's is the migratory one, and it arrives in late January and is gone by August. By the end of August, they're basically gone. And then the Anna's hummingbirds come in.
Is there any truth to this idea I heard that eucalyptus trees can contribute to clogged by the sap when they?
It's a controversial topic. There is no evidence that hummingbirds are adversely affected by eucalyptus. Eucalyptus has been attributed to eucalyptus gum. We see warblers and kinglets with their nostrils clogged up and with black faces from sticking their faces into eucalyptus flowers. And the nectar has apparently got some kind of sticky gum in there. It's been claimed that kills small birds. I've never heard it claimed for hummingbirds, which have a long tubular bill, and so they don't get their face or their nostrils into the flowers or very deep into the flowers. I question the whole issue.
The owls like to hang around the eucalyptus.
It's very important. It's actually a very important food plant for them.
And you can buy that mixture in the bird shop. It goes for about $5 or $6. But if you take regular sugar and throw it in your blender to powder it, it will work just as well and it will dissolve a lot quicker.
Yeah, I've always just boiled it.
Yeah, boiling it is good. Keeping the thing clean, though, they recommend a little bleach. And the thing about using bleach, which will kill any mold in there, is I've never been able to clean out a hummingbird feeder that with any, no matter how dilute the bleach is, I still smell the bleach in there. And I'm always kind of uncomfortable with using bleach to clean out a hummingbird feeder. So, but it's recommended, but I personally don't usually do that. Yes?
At my feeder, I saw a yellow jacket and the hummingbird, and it was like the hummingbird was avoiding the yellow jacket every time it came. Who would win that competition?
All right, here's the way it works, is the smaller you are, the more aggressive you're going to be. And hummingbirds will attack anything that is larger than they are. Okay? Doesn't matter. But if they are something smaller, they hate it. And if there are bees around, yellow jackets, anything like that, they really have problems. And there are things called bee guards you can put on your hummingbird feeder that the bees cannot get through, but the hummingbirds can. And that works reasonably well. But just a little story here on one of my field trips out to Scintillant. We were watching a golden eagle, and a red-tailed hawk came in and dived on that golden eagle, and he ran that golden eagle out of the territory. And then the red-tail circled around, and the kestrel, a smaller bird, came in, attacked the red-tailed hawk, and moved that red-tailed hawk out there. And then the kestrel sat up on the perch, and the Anna's hummingbird came down and started attacking the kestrel. So it's always the little ones that go after the big ones, and they are more agile. You know, basically, what can a golden eagle do? You know, not a whole lot except glide. So the agility of these things is part of the issue. Yes.
So I've seen a hummingbird moth. Why do you think a moth would find it advantageous to look like a hummingbird?
Well, I don't know whether they do. There's some of the sphinx moths are called hummingbird moths, and they are also found in Eurasia, and they do resemble hummingbirds. You can see quite a few of these things high in the Sierra also, and that would be something to do with moth evolution. And it's not something that I've really thought about particularly, except that from a field identification point of view, they do kind of strike you as, wow, I've got a hummingbird here. When I'm in the mountains, I'm hoping I'm going to see Calliope. By the way, if you go to Sierra Nevada, I mentioned Calliope is the only one that breeds up there, but if you go up there in June, July, you'll see a ton of Rufous hummingbirds. Those are all migrants. Here's what happens. The Rufous hummingbirds, the males migrate ahead of the females, then the females arrive up in Western Canada and Oregon, Washington. The females mate with the males. Once the males mate, they're done. They head south through the summer in the Sierra Nevada, taking advantage of the blooms that are happening as the snow has disappeared, and they are the most common hummingbird up there in the summer. People assume they're nesting. They're not. They're on their way to vacation in Mexico. Sounds like some people I know. Yes?
You mentioned there's 7 in California, and I know the 4 most common, and someone mentioned Costas. What are the 2 others?
That have been recorded in California, blue-throated and magnificent, ruby-throated.
You said there were 7 that were common to California.
Oh, 7 that nested.
7 breeding.
7 breeding species? Okay, that'd be black-chinned, Costas, Annas, Allens. Rufous has nested in the 1950s. Broad-tailed, what am I missing? Did I say? I thought I said black chin. Calliope. Yeah, so that's 7, I guess. Okay, one of those is kind of marginal. Rufous is the most marginal, as is broad-tailed.
We have time for one more question.
Yes.
You mentioned predation causing the sexual dimorphism in the plumage. Is that on equal footing as something like polymorphism in flowers? Is there like something that's more primary causing?
I don't know a whole lot about polymorphism in flowers. The idea of predation being a factor is not original with me. It is based on a seminar that Van Remsen gave over at the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology last year. And so I'm just, going on, stealing his idea. But I don't know about polymorphism. You're talking about the same flowers of different colors on the same plant? I always wondered about that.
Size or peak length? Does that say that kind of sexual dimorphism, those factors?
Yeah, well, what are the things that contribute to sexual dimorphism? And one of the things is that in migratory birds, you almost always find a lot more sexual dimorphism than in resident birds. But when it comes to hummingbirds here, the particularly odd thing about it that I was trying to get across is that it appears that the bright, sexy plumage may be the ancestral one, rather than the derived plumage, and that the sexy plumage is from sexual selection. That's not, that may not be what's driving it. I think we're done. Yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.